Big news roundup today, kicking it off. Many of us expected a bit more of a massive patch to usher in 222, and this forum poster, TP's behind you, that's their name, not a sentence, essentially gave that argument on the Overwatch forums, asking why not revert many of the balance changes that were made during the cycle of the GOATS meta to have a hopefully more playable and fun 222 meta. Well, game developer Josh Noh, who's part of the balance team, responded with quite a lengthy post in response, and this is what he said. Balance changes take time, and there will, of course, be more to come. We've just barely entered into 222 role queue and released a new hero at the same time. It's important to collect data and statistics, as well as feedback, to make more informed decisions. Reverting all balance changes over the last year is unlikely to happen. Any hero could potentially affect a meta to some degree, but not all changes are directly targeted at the current meta, if that makes sense. For some transparency, we've known for a while that we would be moving to a 222 format. It required a long time to implement. And not all changes over the last year were directly targeted at affecting the 3-3 GOATS meta, for example, Soldier, McCree, and Junkrat buffs. The goal of the changes that were actually aimed at GOATS, and here I assume he's talking about the armor nerf, Brigitte nerf, the Diva nerf, etc., all of those, was not to kill it entirely, but to weaken it enough without destroying the individual heroes that other new comps could arise to compete with it. Though it took a long time, with the results of Stage 3, I consider that at least somewhat successful. He's referring, of course, to the Shanghai Dragons playing some crazy 3 DPS strategies in order to beat GOATS, and beat it badly, they did. He goes on, even if solutions are hypothetically available, any meta is ultimately dictated by the players. This is really important. I want to get into more on that. But last bit here, he says, aside from meta considerations, it's important to prioritize individual hero balance, which is why we're tuning Zarya and Symmetra's damage output. The recent beam bug fix was much more potent than expected, with those heroes on average seeing a 20 to 40% increase in damage. Their original damage values were tuned without knowledge of this bug. Thanks for your feedback. Okay, a lot to break down here. Some of it I think we could have expected, but other things were now laid out in plain language. And I really like that he talks about the players deciding the meta, because that's the thing we always forget. There isn't inherent value in the concept of pick rates, for example. A lot of people stare at pick rate numbers as if they're the be-all end-all, but realistically, they're just human beings making decisions. They don't hold inherent value of those strategies. Because, for example, if you look at the Stage 3 pick rates, you'd say, well, GOATS is very clearly the top of the meta and nothing can beat it. That's the end of that story. And then the Dragons comes out playing triple DPS lineups, either with Doomfist, swapping that in for Brig, Wrecking Ball, or Orisa solo tank lineups. They did quite literally break the meta, and didn't just win, they stomped their way through the playoffs, beating all of the best GOATS teams. I think that's something that translates to the ranked experience as well. Players are going to decide to take the strategies that they're most comfortable with, whether or not they're the most powerful or not. Had this thought on Twitter last night. There's a interesting development in the Overwatch League meta right now, where teams are running Bastion and Pharah on defense, which are both great up against double shield, but teams are still running double barrier on attack into it, when swapping in for a Diva would make their attacks more potent. But there's a million reasons why a team might not want to do this. Perhaps the personnel they have on the field either can't play that lineup of heroes, or they didn't practice for that, or whatever the case may be, right? But the point is, if the enemy's running that, I advise to the rest of you, most definitely you should be playing Diva, but her necessity and power level for that situation isn't being represented in the pick rates, which is why pick rates basically don't mean much at all. It might as well be a popularity contest rather than an objective look at power levels. Also, more or less covered in this post as well, Josh Noh is essentially conceding the fact that there will always be something at the top of the meta, and there's not really much that they can do about it. Now, I would say that there's systems like hero bans that do a lot to save that, but we don't have time for logical solutions. Instead, yes, in this format, with only a few months to get experience on a patch before a new hero comes out, and often a game-changing balance suite as well, the game actually changes too fast for anybody to learn the intricacies of counter-meta strategies. Given enough time, every meta starts to evolve a little bit, and more counter-picking comes out, but too early in any meta, players are too risk-adverse to test things even when they work. They just feel uncomfortable with taking those risks. As I sort of said earlier, Dive up against Orisa Sigma is incredibly powerful, potentially, but also punishable, hard to play, so a lot of players and pro teams even decide not to do it. So in a nutshell, this sort of informs us in how Blizzard treats the metagame of Overwatch on the whole, and it's a pretty hands-off approach. Whereas instead, and he says this explicitly, that they look into tuning individual heroes, individual interactions, to make sure that they're operating the way they intend. So for example, the Zarya and Symmetra buffs that came through had a massive increase in their overall damage output, which many of us got clued into immediately after testing them out. These types of things are hard to know before you actually test them out. So all things considered, it seems Blizzard's going to be continuing to take a more methodical, even pace with balancing moving forward in the 2-2-2 environment, keeping in mind many of the changes they put through previously were in fact intended for 2-2-2. I don't know how much I believe that with Reaper and Mei being so strong against tanks, for example, but that's an argument for another day. We'll have more reasons to talk about the meta in future videos this week. Moving on to the Overwatch League now, there have been a few points of drama and controversy. More importantly, above that, some really stellar games to tune into. And spoilers ahead, of course, for Overwatch League. The next sentence out of my mouth is going to be a spoiler. After quite a shocking C9, sending them into the losers bracket, the San Francisco Shock have begun a lower bracket run, but otherwise there has been a bit of a flare-up and controversy on Twitter about a post-match interview. The Seoul Dynasty played a pretty tragic and emotional series, and in playoffs, the production team has recently been doing post-match interviews for the losing team as well, and this resulted in two legends of the competitive Overwatch scene, Ryujehong and Tobi, crying their eyes out, apologizing for the poor performance and promising to do better next year. And honestly, it's unlike anything we've seen before in the Overwatch League, because one, normally they didn't do losers interviews, and two, there's few times where a match is so significant that it would lead to players bawling their eyes out. And of course, it's a very emotional time in these young men's career. For context of this, if you don't even know who these players are, you really should. They're two legends of the game, coming from the team Lunatic High, who was the best team in South Korea for what felt like forever before the Overwatch League. Jaehong was essentially the Jonak of his era, with the signature hero being Ana, famous for incredibly clutch sleep darts onto Genji blades, Tobi as well on the Lucio. He's in the intro clip of my Lucio Mastery Guide where he duels a Dragon Blade by himself, and in that clip he kills Haxel's Dragon Blade, no less. And for me, I have to be honest, as a fan of these guys for so many years, this is hard for me to watch. And it was for many fans as well, where now the league is under some scrutiny, pushback against the post-match interviews, which has caused a bit of a controversy. The league casting duo Doa and Monte Cristo went to Twitter to talk about this, saying there is no thrill of victory without the agony of defeat. Monte Cristo saying, I don't blame the younger ones from being uncomfortable around sadness. It's new to them. They grew up on social media and have only ever seen happy people, or at least people pretending to be happy. The plot thickens when after the second match, there was no post-game interviews, making people wonder if after it was a bit of an emotional blow-up, maybe there's something happening behind the scenes, and here Doa dispels this alleged leak from the rumor mill. Honest Towel Mask on Twitter says an OWL source reached out saying that the Shock felt it was unfair and cruel to interview the losing team players post-match, so they insisted that London players not be interviewed. Doa replies in saying, I can't believe I'm even having to say it, but this is absolutely false and the concept is laughably absurd. Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think the league would care what Shock had to say, so the justification just doesn't even add up. I do wonder where they went with it, though. Did they decide not to have them anymore? Was there just no time? Not really sure. And realistically, all of this is just the context for a tweet that Slasher put out mistakenly. He does go on later to correct this, but originally, after Seoul Dynasty lost, before he saw Jaehong and Tobi crying their eyes out in the post-match interview, Slasher said Jaehong is the biggest bust in the Overwatch League, where however you feel about interviewing players post-match and zooming in on them crying, many people felt this was too soon, insensitive, and sadly Jaehong did end up seeing this tweet and responded to it on Twitter saying he agrees he is the biggest bust in the league, but that he always tried his best. Sorry. After kind of kicking the pro player when he was down, Slasher got a lot of pushback for the rude remark and came out on Twitter apologizing, said that he hadn't watched the post-match interview. He apologizes and deleted the original tweet. But Slasher, don't you know this is 2019? Apologies aren't worth anything anymore. anymore. Pretty sure your entire career is canceled or something. I don't make the rules, I just work here. Apparently apologies don't count anymore. Joking, of course, in context of what he was talking about. The point he was making is that Seoul, South Korea is the mecca of esports and should be able to sign on the best players in the world, seeing as half the league is Korean anyway. That point still stands, of course. Nobody gives anybody the benefit of the doubt nowadays. It's impossible to make a critical and meaningful comment about anything without offending someone, it seems. But of course, at the same time, probably while he's crying on stream isn't the best time to do it. Other Overwatch League controversy. It was odd that in the play-in tournament, London Spitfire DPS player Birdring played quite well, was crucial in their win over the Shanghai Dragons in my opinion, and then when it came to the playoffs, he was nowhere to be seen. He then deleted his Twitter and his Instagram post, apologized and said he wasn't motivated for the second half of the season and still confused about his future plans, which it makes it seem likely that he is going to be leaving the London Spitfire. And on top of that, this tweet seems to imply that there was attitude issues in the locker room, so to speak, to cause him to be benched. In any case, some pretty peculiar actions from the player and the team didn't seem to really add up, so there's probably more of a story behind this as well. Okay, enough drama and negative news. The last thing that I wanted to say, which I'm sure many of you already know about, but the Overwatch leak for Nintendo Switch was confirmed. You'll be able to play Overwatch on the hybrid device October 15th. You are allowed to pre-order it on the Nintendo eShop early, but I can't seem to find a physical release being sold anywhere, which would be kind of unfortunate if there is no physical copy, seeing as online games tend to take up a lot of storage space, something that's very limited for a handheld device. But nonetheless, I'm excited to see how Overwatch plays on the Switch. Let me know your guys' thoughts on any of this in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.